Ay, ay, ay. Oh, ay, ay. Oh, ay, ay, ay. Ay, ay, ay. I'm going to share an amazing story that I read over Shabbat from the book Visions of Greatness. There was a woman, everything about the story is completely true, except for the names which have been changed. So there was a woman, and she was a famous actress. And one day, in a little synagogue in New Jersey, she walks into the women's section, and it makes quite a stir. Everyone's talking in the middle of the prayers because, wow, a famous actress doesn't come into synagogue every day. And they're all whispering. And she just does her thing, and, she's saying her prayers. And she sneaks out. So that day, at the Shabbat meal, the Rabbi Grossman is his name. And he goes over to his wife and says, "What was all that ruckus in the women's section today?" And she says, "Wow, didn't you hear? Elaine McMeyer was just stopped into synagogue. And the strangest thing, because she's not even Jewish." And so the rabbi says, "Wow, fascinating. If it happens again, please let me know. I want to ask her what she's doing here." So, in fact, the next Shabbos, she's there praying on the side of the synagogue. This time, everyone's kind of, used to it. And they let her pray, and the Rebbitzin is about to come over to her and ask her what's going on, and she sneaks away. So, on the third Shabbos, the Rebbitzin was ready. She comes and says, "Hi." She introduces herself, and she said, "The rabbi would like to talk to you, if it's okay." And Elaine says, "No problem." So right after synagogue, at the Kiddush, the rabbi goes over and says, "Hi, nice to meet you. I'm just curious, what are you doing here?" She says, "Oh, well, I just felt a calling to come to synagogue. I can't really explain it. I just wanted to pray." And he says, "Do you know the prayers?" And she's like, "Not really." And he says, Are you Jewish?" And she says, "Not really. No, I'm not Jewish, but I just felt a calling to connect to God a little." So the rabbi says, "Interesting. Okay." And thus it went. So every single Shabbat, Elaine comes to synagogue, and she's sitting kind of, quietly on her own, and no one's really bothering her. And a few months in, she's actually mumbling the words. And the Rebbitzin goes over and says, "You know the words?" She says, "Yeah, I actually taught myself Hebrew." And soon she's praying. And a few months later, she comes over to the rabbi and says, "Rabbi, I'd like to convert. I'd like to become Jewish." And the rabbi is quite surprised. And she says, he says what every good rabbi is supposed to do in this situation. He says, "No, we don't actually encourage conversion. And you don't have to be a Jew to go to heaven. And, there are plenty of righteous Gentiles. So it's not necessary. It's very hard, Jewish law, etc., etc." But Elaine is persistent. And she says, "No, this is what my soul says I must do. No matter how hard it will be, I'm going to become Jewish." The rabbi says, "Give it some time. Don't rush into it." And thus it went for the next year. Elaine taught herself the laws of Shabbat and started keeping them, and kashrut, until eventually the rabbi was so impressed. But she was learning what it means to be a Jew. It's a slow process. And one day, the rabbi started hearing that there were these mystery packages, diapers, and money that were being given secretly to the people, the poor women who were giving birth in the neighborhood in New Jersey. And the rabbi looked into the matter. He was very curious. He had a hunch who was doing this, and he looked into it, and he found out that secretly this Elaine woman had been providing money for these poor newborns. And so the rabbi was so impressed. He went over to Elaine, and he said, "You're really sincere? You really want to become Jewish?" She said, "Yes." And they began the process of conversion, and soon she was a full-fledged Orthodox Jew. She changed her entire life. And she was now keeping Judaism. And thus it went until one day Elaine gives the rabbi a call and says, "Rabbi, good news. I'm engaged to this nice, amazing man named Mark, also not his real name, and I'd like the rabbi to meet him before we get engaged." And they met. They had a nice meal together, and the rabbi just asked, kind of sheepishly, "Mark, you don't happen to be a Kohen, a priest from the Kohen tribe, the Levites?" And Mark said, "Actually, I am. I think I am. My grandpa was." And the rabbi says, "Oh, that's not so good, because according to Jewish law," and Elaine knew this, a Kohen is not supposed to marry a convert. So this is bad news, and thus sadly ended their engagement together. And life went on, and the rabbi actually retold this story to his rabbi, who is a famous Dayan, Rabbi Grossman, the Rosh Yeshiva of Netzach Yisrael in Rechavia, and someone who is considered one of the greatest Gedolim of that generation in the 60s, and I know a lot of stories about him, but the rabbi told him this story, and Rabbi Grossman said, "What? A woman that practices such kindness and is so drawn to Judaism, she must really be Jewish." And who says he's really a Kohen anyway, just because he says he's a Kohen? That was what Rav Grossman. That was what Rav Guzman said, and he was surprised by the rabbi's words. He didn't really know what to do with it. And life went on till one day, Elaine calls up the rabbi, and they wanted to come over for a Shabbat meal. And the rabbi actually retold her what Rabbi Guzman said, and she was very moved by his kind words. And she said, "Well, the truth is, my mother was adopted, so I always wondered if maybe she actually originally was Jewish." And it got the rabbi thinking about it, and she said, "Well, where's your family from?" He said, "This town." The next trip, the rabbi happened to be in Israel, and he happened to run into someone from that exact town. And he said, "Were there any Jews from this town?" He said, "Yeah, of course, there are many, many Jews in this town," said the man he ran into. And so this really impressed Elaine. She hired a private detective, and they went to the graves, and they did all sorts of research of people who lived in that town, and it turned out, indeed, her family actually were descended from Jews, which meant that she was actually Jewish the whole time. And maybe that explained her calling to be Jewish. Since she was Jewish, technically she could marry. She wasn't a convert. She could marry Mark the Kohen. Still, the rabbi was a bit hesitant until later when he was schmoozing with Mark about it. And he said, "Mark, are you sure you're really a Kohen?" And Mark said, "Well, actually, I'm not really so sure because, well, the only reason I thought it was a Kohen is because I got called up as the first aliyah in my synagogue, but the rabbi from my synagogue wasn't so knowledgeable, so maybe he just called me up first. And it wasn't an Orthodox synagogue. He did some research into it. The rabbi looked into this person's lineage also. He found the family and the Gabbai in Europe, and indeed, Mark's grandparents actually were not Kohanim. They were not priests. It was a mistake. And so they certainly could go out, and in fact, the rabbi set it up again, and Mark and Elaine actually did end up getting married, and have a beautiful family, doing kindness, doing chesed, and raising good, holy Jewish children. So what can I say? So many inspirational messages from this lesson. To me, the chacham, the wisdom of Rav Gustman, he just somehow intuited these things. To me, is just another of the many stories of divine providence guiding our holy sages. May you be blessed with a beautiful day. Oh, ay, 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 ay. Oh, ay, 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 ay.